Uh, just let me know if you see everything.
And I could just give a brief introduction for you, John, if that's okay.
Yes, please, Jack.
So welcome, everyone. My name is Jack Riffle. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Farmers Market Federation. And we thank you so much for joining us for our Friends and Members Monthly Meetup, which we do monthly. And today we're fortunate to be joined by Jason Salmon, Director of External Affairs, and John Kagia, Director of Policy at the Office of Cannabis Management. And they're here to tell us a little bit about the role that cannabis might be able to play at farmers markets or the role that it can't play. And maybe a little bit about this application process that they've been talking about. So if you haven't muted your microphone already, please do that. And I'll let John and Jason take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Jack, and thank you all for being here and for inviting us to have this conversation. As Jack said, I'm the Director of Policy here at the Office of Cannabis Management. Present an opportunity for this dialogue on the emergence of legal regulated cannabis in the state of New York, and really ensuring that adult consumers who want access to legal regulated cannabis are able to have it throughout the state. Given that, and apologies for running a few minutes late, we had a board meeting this morning that ended up running quite late. But I'll try to use the time that we have here to do a couple of things. One, provide a bit of a framing about the legal regulated marketplace in New York. And I understand from what I heard as I joined that Jason had given a bit of a primer there. To talk specifically about this Cannabis Grower Showcase initiative, which will be the bulk of discussion. And then three, reserve some time for us at the tail end for questions. It's a fairly straightforward process, but an exciting and fairly innovative program to try and ensure that even as we're building out our retail ecosystem, we're providing some innovative opportunities for the producers of our cannabis to connect with the consumers of cannabis across the state. So next slide. So first, it's really important to understand that New York State already has a very significant base of existing consumers. Since 2014, the number of consumers who report using cannabis in the past year has risen from 14% to 22%. Those who report consuming in the past month has risen from about 9% to 16%, essentially doubling. And so right now, there are about roughly 3 million consumers in the state of New York who consume regularly. Legalization is not about creating new consumers. It's about transitioning consumers who currently exist in the unregulated illicit market and bringing them into the legal market. And so the work of the office has been largely, if not principally, focused on creating an ecosystem that allows the consumers, the production, the sale of this cannabis that has largely happened in the shadows or through unregulated channels, and bringing that into a robustly regulated framework. Next slide. And the activation of this legal regulated market will present a phenomenally opportunity-rich opportunity. This year, we currently have 23 stores that are open across the state based on the performance of those stores. We're anticipating that we'll do roughly $100 to $200,000 in sales this year. $100 million to $200 million in sales this year. But as early as next year, we could be at $2 billion. And by the time we get to the end of the decade, we're fully expecting that this will comfortably be a $5 to $8 billion ecosystem. And that's just retail sales to consumers. That doesn't include all of the value addition and additional revenue that will come from the manufacturing and cultivation sides of the market. So kind of worth noting that a lot of those dollars are already being spent by consumers. This is already a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem. What we're trying to do is capture that in the legal market, and it's going to happen quite quickly, as you can see from this chart. But we are very bullish about the scale that we're going to be seeing. We've already laid the foundation for our legal market. We have issued nearly 300 cultivator licenses. We have issued processor licenses, and our processors are those who take the raw biomass, the flower, and use its extracted oils and other compounds to manufacture things like edibles, beverages, vaporizers, skin lotions, etc. And critically, we've issued 463 retail licenses. However, due to litigation that we are currently dealing with, we have been enjoined from operationalizing many of those licenses. So as it currently stands, we only have 23 stores that are open. And those 23 stores are kind of carrying the bulk of the work that we're doing now. We are going to be opening up retail expansively. We're going to be issuing, by the end of this year, we're expecting to have opened and accepted over 1,000 retail applications. So retail at scale is coming. It is just going to take us a little while to get that up and running, which is part of the reason why we've implemented the Cannabis Grower Showcase program. And if you could skip the next slide, we don't need to go into this one. So quickly, what is the Cannabis Grower Showcases? As I've mentioned, we've issued our cultivation licenses. Our producers have grown, some terrific cannabis. But because of the slower than anticipated deployment of our retail, we wanted to create a program that would provide opportunities for consumers across the state in places where retail stores are not currently open, the ability to buy regulated cannabis products. So this temporary program, it is going to sunset on January 1st, 2024, allows cannabis cannabis retailers to partner with cultivators and, if they choose, with processors as well, to sell cannabis in non-storefront but office-approved locations. We are quite kind of expansive in how we're defining these non-storefront locations, provided that they meet some certain compliance, security, and audience requirements that we'll get into in this conversation. Next slide. To be clear, while the Cannabis Grower Showcases are intended to present opportunities for retail sales, one, these are not consumption events. The CGSs do not sanction on-site consumption. We are working on, as required by law, or as written into the cannabis law, a framework by which we will have licenses, permits for on-site consumption spaces. But that is not what the CGS program is about. And so this is about retail, not about consumption. Two, this isn't about giving folks who aren't licensed opportunities to sell cannabis right now. It is only for people who are authorized to sell cannabis. And three, because we have this prohibition in our market that prohibits licensees who are on the supply side from making retail sales, our cultivators and processors cannot sell cannabis directly to consumers. All sales must be done by our retailers, hence this model where you have one retailer, a minimum of 3 growers participating. We're trying to provide opportunities for growers to be showcased. And so the growers can present their product, but when it comes time for the consumer to make a sale, that has to be executed by the retailer. We have a robust application and regulatory compliance protocol in order to participate in the CGS. One, the CGS organizer must seek approval from the office before the event. And we have a 10-day application window where the CGS organizer must submit the application to us a minimum of 10 days before the event to make sure that we have the ability to review all of the submitted materials. Two, the CGS organizer must get approval from the municipality in order to do this and ensure that it's being done in a way that adheres to local rules. So, for example, CGSs can't take place in a community or a jurisdiction which has opted out of cannabis retail sales. There are several parts of the state, several jurisdictions across the state of New York, which have opted out of retail sales. They were given the option to do that when the cannabis law passed. And so we are respecting that, we're honoring that by prohibiting CGSs from happening in those locations. And then three, and this might be applicable to those of you who have farmers markets either close to academic institutions or to houses of worship. Our cannabis law dictates that retail sales cannot happen within 200 feet of a house of worship, 500 feet from a school, or within either 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, depending on the population density of the jurisdiction, of another cannabis retailer. That applies to the Cannabis Grower Showcase. So, for example, you couldn't have a Cannabis Grower Showcase taking place in a church parking lot or next to a school or other education facility. We review the proposed location from every proposed CGS to make sure that it adheres to those distancing requirements, but just flagging the farmers market managers that the location of where you tend to have your farmers markets could be implicated by these distancing requirements if you're thinking about hosting CGS. So who is eligible to participate? As I've said now severally, essentially it is our licensed retailers who will be selling the product, and then our licensed cultivators who will be showcasing, with the option of the organizers also adding on a processor, a manufacturer of value-added products to the CGS. All of the licensees must be in good standing, and we review that before the CGS takes place. So we actually view all of their compliance history to make sure that they're in good standing before we authorize them to participate. But as it currently stands, this is 21, we actually have 23 retailers who can participate, and we've seen about 17 of them participate in at least one CGS since the program launched in August. Next slide. To be a CGS organizer, you have to be one of our licensees. It's about that simple. You can work with other stakeholders to put these events together. So, for example, we know several CGSs that have worked with cannabis event organizers, or more generally, kind of event venues, to figure out the location, help implement the programming, etc. But in terms of who is organizing it from the office's standpoint, and in sending us the documentation and corresponding with the office to ensure compliance, all of that has to be done by one of our licensees. So we encourage you to be partners with organizers, but only licensed entities can liaise with the office in terms of the development of this program or development of an individual event. Next slide. This is a bit inside the weeds, but I will just say that, the organizer can be any one of our 3 licensed cohorts. It can be a conditional cultivator or a retailer. They're the ones who will be getting the authorization to permit from us. The vendor is a person who is running the sales. That has to be a conditional adult use retail dispensary licensee, one of the 23 that we currently have issued. And then participants can be, the suppliers, either additional retailers, as well as the cultivators and processors. We don't limit how many licensees you can have in these events. You just need a minimum of one retailer and a minimum of 3 cultivators to do one. And then you can scale up from there if needs be. We know we've had some CGSs where they've had 9 cultivators, 3 processors, and 2 or 3 retailers. There's only been one organizer, so one organizer has liaised with us to build that large event. But we've certainly seen interest in doing these as large and more scaled out events. Slide. I've talked about this at length. So, you know, you have the organizer liaises with the office and the cultivator or retailer, and then the vendors work with at least 3 growers and have the option of having a CP, a conditional processor. So the CCs are the conditional cultivators, the CPs are the conditional processors. And that ratio right now is sacrosanct. Yeah, thanks for speeding along, Jason. Keep going. Next slide. So, broad framing of where these can take place. One is we allow these to take place at our licensed facilities. So either you can do a CGS in a licensed store, at a licensed cultivation facility or farm, or at a processing facility. 2, you can organize these as a standalone event, and that might be of some interest to the farmers market managers, where there's nothing else happening but the CGS. And we've seen some success there. And I'll give the example of the city of New Paltz, which has been a great partner in this program. As soon as we announced the program, the mayor's office reached out. We had a call with them, and they offered their municipal parking lot as a venue for the CGS. And they've basically been having a CGS take place behind the city buildings in the municipal parking lot every day, or almost every day now, for 7 weeks, and it's just been a stellar performer. The traffic, the amount of sales has been wonderful. So, you know, if you're doing a standalone CGS, you're certainly welcome to have other vendors there. Just recently we saw one application who said he's got a great, you know, partner who makes pickles, and they wanted to sell pickles next to it, so we permit that. But you can organize these as a standalone event, but you can also piggyback onto other types of events. So whether it's kind of festivals or fairs, holiday markets, etc. We do have requirements around who the intended audience for a specific venue is going to be. So if the intended audience is likely to be principally or predominantly minors, people who are underage, then we certainly wouldn't permit a CGS there. But for events that are aimed at and oriented to adults, we certainly have approved and welcome opportunities to approve more kind of piggybacking of the CGS on an existing market or on an existing event. So I think this covers much of what I've just discussed. Plenty of locations where we think CGSs can be held, and we've certainly seen them held in a wide variety of locations. But the distancing requirements from schools, houses of worship, and other cannabis retailers are really the 3 requirements that we hold sacrosanct. And we have several kind of event options. I don't think we need to go into that. For our licensees, and I'm making the distinction here between what our licensees can sell through their CGS versus what else can be sold at a CGS by other vendors. Our licensees are authorized to sell cannabis products, so smokable flower, pre-rolls, infused beverages, edibles, etc. Cannabinoid hemp products, so the types of things that you might find in a CBD store. Cannabis paraphernalia, rolling papers, pipes, bongs, lighters, etc. stationery gift, other incidentals, or branded merchandise that has the logos, promotes individual brands in our ecosystem. So those are the things that our licensees are authorized to sell. But you can have other vendors who sell other things at the CGS that aren't regulated by the office, but can be made available by other operators. And obviously, age requirement, age gating is a critical thing here for us. I'll skip over this. I think this is inside baseball. And just to provide some assurance to the farmers market managers here, we have a very comprehensive compliance and auditing process for these CGSs. It's part of the reason why we have this 10-day pre-event application requirement. We review all of the licensees to make sure that they are in good standing. We review all of the inventory that is being proposed to be sold to make sure that it's compliant with our requirements. We require the licensees to tell us how much quantity they're going to be taking to the CGS, how much is sold, and how much is going to be, and how much is left over at the end. So there's a 3-part reporting process in order to be approved. We require very detailed information about who the staff are at this event, who's going to be the on-site manager of the CGS, who is the primary point of contact. We have rules governing marketing and signage. You can't have giant billboards advertising a CGS, on the side of the highway. The CGSs have to comply with the broader packaging, marketing, labeling, and advertising rules for cannabis in the state of New York. We want to see a security plan. We want to know where the product is going to be stored. We want to see how cash is going to be managed on site. And finally, on the environmental and sustainability side, we want to know how they're going to take care of anything that needs to be disposed of as a result of the Cannabis Grower Showcase. So many of the rules that govern the implementation of retail sales in the state also apply to the Cannabis Grower Showcases. And just want to provide some assurance that these aren't fly-by-night operations. We do hold these folks to a high standard, where we occasionally do kind of spot checks at the event, but we require extensive documentation of their processes and protocols in order to get these events authorized. And mentioned earlier that we only allow our retailers to be the ones to implement the transactions. That's a function of our regulatory framework, which has what we call a 2-tier rule. Broadly speaking, just so you understand, the 2-tier rule dictates that you are either a supplier or a retailer in this market. You cannot be both. So you can't grow and process and also sell. There's a small exception there, but broadly speaking. In that context, for these CGSs to be compliant, there has to be a retailer that's running the transaction. And the growers and processors who are showing up they can communicate to customers, they can tell their stories, they can talk about the products, they can build that relationship, but they can't run cards, they can't accept cash, they can't accept payment. That has to be done by the CGS, by the approved vendor who is one of our retailers. Next slide. So I've talked a little bit about the application process and all of the things that we review. One thing I hadn't mentioned yet is the requirement for municipal approval. Every CGS, much like as does every retail store, has to get approval from the municipality in order to happen within a given jurisdiction. We have found, the jurisdictions where the CGSs have taken place to be very engaging. Some have reached out directly to us, asking us to send them folks who want to organize a CGS. Others have created a fairly streamlined process for this. But just want to make it clear that these CGSs have to be done with explicit municipal approval, and part of the application process is submitting a letter from the municipality to the office with the application package that shows that the event has been authorized and the dates for which it has been authorized. Just a quick point about local taxes. So the CGSs are happening all over the state. We have a process by which cannabis is taxed, where 9% of the retail sales value of the product is taxed, and that money goes to the state. But there's an additional 4% that is taxed with our what we call the municipal tax, where that 4% goes to the municipality where the event has taken place. So part of the benefit for the municipalities who are authorizing the CGSs to take place is they're essentially getting 4% of the revenue of all of the sales that happen at these CGSs. And so we have a process by which our licensees report that up to the Department of Tax and Finance, and then DTF will make those funds available to the municipality. We require the organizer, and so you as the farmers market managers won't have to do any of this, but we do require the organizers to tell us where the CGS is going to be held, send us a detailed site plan, give us the address, tell us the hours of operations and days of the week, tell us who the staff is going to be, give us visibility into the marketing plans, and critically, give us that municipal letter of approval, as well as a list of all of the inventory to be sold. It's a comprehensive package, but our folks seem to be doing just fine with it. And I just wanted to close, we'll have plenty of time for questions, but wanted to close by showing how the CGSs have worked so far. So we've seen incredible interest in this program since it launched. We've approved 26 to date, 9 of which have happened and concluded, 21 of which are still ongoing. And you can see on the map before you the breadth of places across the state where these events have been taking place. In many instances, so one of the rules about the CGS is it can be recurring, but cannot be for more than 14 days consecutively. So what we have seen from many of our CGSs is they'll run, or they schedule them on a recurring basis, but say have them run for 10 to 14 days, take a couple of days off, and then run for another 10 to 14 days iteratively through the end of the year. Some are only running on weekends, some are only running on the afternoons, on weekdays, but they have the ability to organize these on a recurring basis through January 1st. It just can't be on a recurring basis every day of the week. There has to be some break there. These are not intended to be substitutes for retail stores, so we don't want folks kind of renting out a storefront and just parking in there for the next 3 months. But you can run them ongoing through the end of the year. We lost the screen there.
Oh, I thought you said you wanted to end on that slide. Hold on, I can bring it back up. Sorry.
It was just one more slide that I wanted to show.
Got it. Hold on for a second. There we go. Okay, back on.
Thank you. And just pop over to the next slide, which will have some metrics on the retail performance so far. There you go. So performance to date, we have had 35 calendar days in which a CGS has occurred across the state. And of those 35 calendar days, there have been 173 individual CGS event days that have happened in that period. We're seeing an average of roughly $8,000 in sales per CGS per day. And then an average of $40,000 per calendar day in CGSs happening across the state. So far this year, we've generated a $1.4 million in CGS sales revenues. We did nearly $500,000 just that week of Labor Day, so really strong performance. And we already have scheduled, this says 1250, but we got a couple of more applications in yesterday. So we're roughly 1,300 CGS event days scheduled through the end of the year, and currently on track to do 12 to maybe $15 million by the end of the year. So it's been a strong performer. We're seeing a great deal of interest. It's not a substitute for retail stores, but a great way to connect the incredible products that our cannabis producers, growers have created here in New York, and give New York's consumers access to these products, particularly in jurisdictions where we don't yet have stores open. So I'll conclude there, and would be happy to take any questions. But again, just wanted to thank the association for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation, and appreciate your interest in the CGS framework.
Awesome. Well, we were so happy to have you, and I'm sure there are plenty of questions in the audience. And actually, I've got one myself, if I could start us off.
Yeah, please.
So you noted, I think, that growers and processors cannot sell directly to customers.
Mhm.
And one aspect of farmers markets, one key aspect is that the kind of like the direct sales.
Mhm.
What was in the thought process behind, having rules that limit cultivators from being able to make direct sales to customers?
So it's actually a function of our law, of the law that legalized cannabis sales in the state of New York, and the preservation there, the intent there was partly as a way to stimulate greater market competition. So our cannabis law is actually mirrored largely on the alcohol law, and we followed quite closely the SLA's framework, where you have companies that make alcohol, but you don't have, say, Budweiser or Jack Daniels also running retail. We are one of the unique states where the producers don't also sell. But one of the attendant benefits of doing it that way is that you keep the market from getting hyper consolidated, and it creates actually more retail opportunities and more opportunities for smaller producers to compete, compared to markets where one company can own the entire supply chain, and that makes it really challenging for smaller producers and smaller retailers to compete. We have found in the Cannabis Grower Showcases program specifically, so we're bound by law, that we can't change, but we have found that the real engagement is happening between the growers and the consumers. So it's a chance for many cannabis consumers who've never had a chance to meet the people who grow the cannabis they consume, to engage with their producers for the first time. And really, the vendor, the retailer is just there to process the transactions. They may be able to provide some support, but we intended this to be an opportunity to really foster that level of engagement. But by law, we can't have the growers also run the transactions.
Great. Anyone else have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
I have a question. This is Diane from the Farmers Market Federation. And you said this Growers Showcase expires January of 2024, correct?
Yes, that's right.
What then? Is there something similar to this that's coming up next, or what are the thoughts?
Thank you for asking that, Diane, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this. So we had always envisioned the Cannabis Grower Showcase program to be a temporary one. It will sunset on January 1st. If it is extended, it will be extended on a nominal basis. But we are working on, as a follow-up to this, and leveraging the lessons learned from this program, on what will be a broader event license that takes many of the elements that are of us in a CGS and expands them out with a little more flexibility. And so under the events framework, we would be envisioning an adapted model of the CGS where perhaps there'd be fewer restrictions on who is able to participate in terms of the number of growers or processors you could participate, or the combination thereof. There will, to answer more succinctly, there will be a subsequent event license, that event permit, that will follow the sunsetting of this. There may be a little bit of lag between the end of the CGS program and when we spool up the event authorizations, but we're working on that regulatory framework, on building that regulatory framework as we speak. And the intention will be to basically have there continue to be opportunities to do farmers markets types events, to do cannabis retail sales at non-storefront locations. We would love to be able to see, or we expect that we will be seeing, say, cannabis sales happening in many of the types of events where you would be seeing alcohol sales happen. The permitting process for that and the regulatory framework for that still needs to be defined, but there will be a follow-up authorization that builds on the lessons from the CGS program.
Okay, so then we probably will want to talk with you again sometime next year.
I certainly hope so.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
So I see a question from Sophie Grant. Can a CGS happen nearby or in the same space as alcohol sales or consumption? Yes, but our licensees are not able to have sales occur. So we've certainly seen several events where there's been kind of alcohol vendors who are in their age-gated area of the event, and then the cannabis grow showcase happening in a separate or segregated age-gated area. There's no rule against those two things happening on the same event venue in the same event space. Just that our licensees aren't able to sell alcohol.
I've got another question. If a farmer's market wanted to have cannabis sold at their market, they would, in order to do that, would they have to, or could they reach out to one of your 23 licensees, have them apply for an event, and then could they set up at the farmer's market so long as that they're adhere to those segregated rules that you have?
Yes, and so and short in an abbreviated way, yes, absolutely. So if you have a farmer's market that is interested in having sales occur, the one thing we'll be looking quite closely at is kind of the intended audience of the farmer's market. The public health element, ensuring that these aren't happening in areas where you would expect a very high number of minors is a consideration. But if a farmer's market is interested in doing this, then they could reach out to our retailers, reach out to the office, and we'd be happy to connect them to one of our 23 retailers, or share those contacts for folks who are organizing the CGSs. And the event organizer, one of our licensees, would then collect all of the information from the farmers market, from the other participating licensees, and submit that to us for review.
And where can farmers market managers find a list of authorized retailers?
Great question. We have a list of authorized retailers on our website. It's Find a Dispensary, but it might actually be, for this program and just for efficiency's sake, if you email us on this call, email Jason and I, we can help with that facilitation.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I've seen a question from Lisa Brocato on what kind of security is required to execute a CGS. What essentially we want to ensure is that our licensees have a protocol for managing the security of the product. So part of that is just ensuring that there's a segregated place where the cannabis is being kept away from the general public. That could be in a locked vehicle so that they're only replenishing the supplies as they need it. It could be, you're keeping the products away from public view. I don't want to overstate the requirements here. It's not that you need armed security or that you need to bring a giant safe on site. But we just want to make sure that our licensees are taking reasonable and well-considered measures to minimize the security implications, the security risk of both the product and of the cash that they might be taking if they're accepting cash payments. Broadly speaking, our retailers in particular have a ton of experience with very robust security protocols because we require those for their stores. And so we haven't found that the security plans have been at all an issue for our retailers. They know what's expected and have been able to get it done.
Go ahead, Lisa. You can unmute yourself and ask your question if you have a question.
Hi, yes. Hi, John. Hi, Jason. Yes, Lisa Brown from Windfall Farms. So as Jeff had said, a key component in a farmer's market model is, the right to retail, allowing a farmer, that point of sale where they can get the full market value. And I would like to know how the OCM is going to ensure that those principles and protections for farmers are going to be kept in place during this CGS this year as well. And furthermore do you guys have any plans to include these protections as you morph this into an event license? It's my understanding that every time a new CGS comes up, it is the retailer's option to create the deal of sale. And so we are seeing that AUCCs aren't able to collect very close to the retail value of their item, but are being put in a position where they have to house the labor of that sale. So just if you could elaborate more on potentially what the future of the OCM looks like for this program.
So because of the law's establishment of the two-tier market, and partly because of the kind of free market nature of what we're trying to build here, there's some limitations on how much we can intervene in the relationships between our cultivators and processors. For the CGSs specifically, because this was intended to be a temporary special program, one of the limits that we put in place was that at least for flower, the growers, the retailers are supposed to be capped at a 50% markup on the flower products. There's no markup cap on the manufactured side of the ledger. So for processed products, they can sell them at their standard markups, which are usually 100%. What this looks like moving forward has not yet been determined, given that the event license was really intended to be more expansive than a quote-unquote farmer's market model, rather than it being rather than the events license is meant to be much more expensive than just a farmers market model. Here we're thinking about this extending to things like people who might want to have a kind of cannabis sales, cannabis access at a wedding, for example, because we've heard that raised a couple of times. But that said, we're going to be working very closely with all of the licensees in our supply chain, working very closely with our cultivators, particularly during this, especially challenging time when we have a lot of supply and not enough retail. Just try and ensure that one, the intended outcomes of the CGS is to maximize sell-through for our producers will be realized. For the retailers, in order to participate, we had to allow the retailers. In order to encourage the participation, we had to allow the retailers to charge at least some markup. For the CGSs, compared to what they normally charge in store, we said that the markup should be no more than 50%. We understand fully that that does mean that the grower isn't receiving 100% of the sales value of that transaction. But really, what we're trying to do is create a framework where we can have sales occur in a non-conventional, non-traditional storefront location, and to do so in a legally compliant way. And so, we're juggling a lot of competing and sometimes divergent legal and regulatory requirements. But we're hopeful that whereas each individual transaction, whereas the rules require retail participation and therefore may limit the ability for the grower to receive the full payout from each individual sales transaction, we hope that while even as that limitation in place, that the number of CGSs that we have and the number and the scale of participation we'll see will allow for robust sell-through that aligns with what the growers might have been able to achieve had they sold this in a more conventional kind of storefront relationship.
On one follow-up on that, was there a slide that showed that cultivators could sell pre-rolled?
Yes, absolutely.
So they could sell pre-roll and flowers, or
exactly right. So and thank you for flagging this. So the cultivators can sell flower-based products. So loose flower, that has been tested and is in compliant packaging. So the bags of ACE, quarters, halves, or full ounces, as well as pre-rolled cannabis, whether those are pre-rolled packages or individual pre-rolls. As long as it is tested and compliant, the retailers can sell it. The manufacturers can only sell.
The cultivators can sell it. Do you mean?
Yes, only the cultivators can sell the flower-based products, and then the manufacturers can only sell the value-added products. So the manufacturers can only sell the edibles, beverages. They cannot sell flour as well. So we've tried to create that segregation and make sure that growers are the ones who are getting to sell and showcase their products, and then the manufacturers are limited to selling the value-added products that they produce.
Sure. I think that after hearing that, I think that more closely aligns with kind of the vision we have of farmers markets, where growers are able to sell, often their raw product, though in certain circumstances, farmers do create value-added products as well.
Yeah. So not quite raw in that it still has to go through our very comprehensive testing and compliance, the packaging rules. But yes, the growers really are able to sell their own product, and that was what this entire program was intended to stimulate more sell-through opportunities for our growers.
Great. It'd be awesome to see that going forward, after the sunset of the CGS. So I think we have one more question from Sophie, and then I'll close us out. Sophie, go ahead.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I just wanted to jump in and, draw the connection between cannabis and alcohol sales at farmers markets, as I see it as a market manager. There's, of course, a lot of consideration that has gone into this rollout. And as this product comes to market and all of the decriminalization and, that our culture is going through, I think something that makes sense to laymen's, people who aren't in the weeds with all the nitty-gritty legal aspects. Over time, can you see this moving to a place where an individual cultivator can pursue a license to sell at a farmer's market in the same way that distilleries, wineries, breweries, cideries, that these agricultural products have a place at a farmer's market without having to go? I mean, they still have to produce licenses, certifications and get inspected. But thinking about sort of how these are paralleled, that maybe there's a future for individual processors or cultivators to produce documentation to a farmer's market and then not have to go through this CGS process, if that's not the community's appetite or the bandwidth of the participants?
So love the question and love the thinking here, Sophie, for the future term kind of evolution of this market. And I think you raised some really important points about what is happening in the state. We understand that this is, in some respects, just a milestone transformation of the state's and our community's relationship with cannabis. It's been remarkable to see this sometimes slow, sometimes very fast and dramatic emergence of cannabis out of the shadows and into the light. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, this is not about creating new consumers. This is not about bringing new people into the market. It is largely about allowing consumers who have largely been in the shadows for decades to finally come out of the shadows and participate fully in what is a massive economy. Arguably one of New York's largest agricultural economies, if you look at how much of the product is being consumed. So that's the first point. Two, on the idea of producers being able to sell. But early in the presentation, I talked about the segregation and the segregation of our two-tier market, either a supplier or a retailer B. We do have one license that's called a micro business license. That is one of the exceptions to that two-tier segregation. Under a micro business license, a producer is able to grow cannabis on a small scale. So you're allowed a relatively limited cultivation footprint, but you're also able to sell the cannabis that you grow directly. So you will have retail authorizations for what some might call a farm stand that's either adjacent to where you're growing your cannabis or in proximate location to where the cannabis operations are. That micro business authorization, because it includes retail authorizations, may be the closest or maybe the one kind of path by which some growers would have the ability to participate without a retail partner in farmers markets or in direct retail sales. We're still working on the rules for what that might look like. And to be clear, we are building the ship as we're flying it. It's been very interesting to be figuring out some of these things based on the questions and feedback that we're getting and based on the opportunities as they present themselves. But that might be at least one area, one approach, the micro business license, where there might be an option there to have folks sell the product that they grow at a farmer's market venue, because they'll have the ability to sell their own cannabis in their farm stand or in their own retail venue. But we haven't yet fully finalized the regulations for who might be able to sell outside of the conventional storefront locations or farm stands, and what that process might look like. But please keep in touch and follow us, and we will be making those rules available likely early next year as we guide the rollout for the event permit. That's going to be one of the pieces that we still need to finalize.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So thank you again to Jason and John for joining us today. I feel like we had a very informative presentation and learned a lot. Next year, or not next year, next month, you can join us again at our monthly meetup, because we'll have Adam Howell, the Director of Outreach for New York FarmNet, to discuss some of the services that his organization provides farmers, farm families, and agribusiness, about some of the personal and financial challenges that farmers face. And that'll be on October 24th. So thanks again, Jason and John. We so appreciate you joining us today, and wishing everyone a wonderful Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you very much, Jack. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And we'll send out those slides. So Jason can share those with me, and we'll get those out.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.